the Secretary of Health of the United States, RFK Jr., has recently come out with some pretty nasty anti-autism comments. He wants to set up a registry to document autistic people, which is pretty strange. He has called it a disease, right? So what I want to do is I want to give two perspectives on autism. One of them comes from RFK Jr. himself. The other one comes from Osamu Dazai in his novel No Longer Human. So first, I'm gonna read an article from the New York Times that describes RFK Jr.'s perspective. Then I'll talk about Dazai, who was probably an autistic author, one of the most successful Japanese authors of all time, and he wrote probably one of the most successful implicitly autistic books of all time, No Longer Human. So I want to offer two different perspectives on this. So first I'm going to read the New York Times article. I'm going to need my glasses. Not only am I autistic, I'm also blind. Alright, I have a printer. Well, let's see if we can do this. From the New York Times. In remarks laced with scientific inaccuracies, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, said on Wednesday that autism was preventable, while directly contradicting researchers within his own agency on a primary driver behind rising rates of the condition in young children. Mr. Kennedy made his comments at a news conference, responding to a new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, showing that rates of autism had increased to 1 in 31 among 8-year-olds, continuing on a long-running trend. Blaming environmental risk factors for the uptick, he accused the media and the public of succumbing to a myth of epidemic denial, ironic, when it came to autism. He also cut research into the genetic factors that scientists say play a vital role in whether a child will develop autism, a dead end. So it's a dead end to research the genetic factors of autism. Genes don't cause epidemics, he said. You need an environmental toxin. Autism rates among children have increased nearly fivefold since 2000, when the CDC first began collecting data on the condition's incidence in children. The CDC's new report attributed some of the increase in autism prevalence to more screening for the condition. And researchers have pointed to several other factors, including greater awareness of what autism looks like. More, turning to a new page. Let's see. More access to services, more parents having children later in life, and broader definitions of the disorder. Mr. Kennedy vowed that under his leadership, that under his leadership, the health department would focus on looking into certain substances, like mold and food additives and parental obesity, to try to reverse rising rates of autism in children. These are kids who, many of them, were fully functional and regressed because of some environmental exposure into autism when they're 2 years old, he said. Scientists have not ruled out the possibility that both genes and environmental factors could influence whether a child develops autism. Still, there is no evidence to suggest that autism can be avoided, and researchers immediately criticized the suggestion. Dr. Eric van Boon, who is a long-time autism researcher and professor emeritus at Oregon Health and Science University, called Mr. Kennedy's claim ridiculous. Autism is not an infectious disease, so there aren't preventive measures that we can take, said Dr. Joshua Anbar, an assistant teaching professor at Arizona State University, who helped collect data for the CDC report. Though Mr. Kennedy did not specifically mention vaccines in his remarks on Wednesday, he has previously sought to tie childhood vaccinations to rising rates of autism. Dozens of studies have failed to establish a link between autism and vaccines. Nevertheless, the health department recently hired a discredited vaccine skeptic to examine the theory. So, we could go on reading this. When asked by a reporter whether differences in the way autism is diagnosed could explain the rise in cases, Mr. Kennedy argued such changes could account for no more than a fraction of the increase. No evidence for that. Researchers said there is no one reason autism rates have risen, but that increased screening was likely a large factor. The more you look for it, the more you find, said Dr. Maureen Durkin, a professor of population health sciences and pediatrics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who has long studied autism. Dr. Durkin is one of the authors of the CDC report. Mr. Kennedy repeatedly dismissed the idea that screenings had driven the uptick as a canard and chastised epidemic deniers, again ironic, for focusing on genetic instead of environmental factors. He argued that genes could not do any more than predispose someone to be more susceptible to environmental factors, likening it to the fact that not all smokers die of lung cancer. Sounds like a false equivalency. Experts said there is legitimate research to be done examining potential environmental factors, but recoiled at Mr. Kennedy's apparent all-or-nothing approach, which seemed to discount entirely the merits of continuing to study the genetic underpinnings of the condition. Remember, this guy is the head of the health department. Scientists have known since the 1970s that genetics contribute to the development of the neurodevelopmental disorder. Studies of twins from that time showed that identical twins were more likely than fraternal twins who do not have the same genetic makeup to develop the disorder. Studies since have identified hundreds of genetic abnormalities that are associated with autism. So this is the last page from this. We know there is a clear genetic contribution. That is not in question, said Catherine Lord, a psychologist and autism researcher at the University of California, Los Angeles. The question is, could it interact with the environment? Could it interact with the environment? Could it be that someone who has a genetic risk for autism is then exposed to something that then results in autism? Open question. Mr. Kennedy also reiterated plans to commission studies to identify environmental toxins to explain rising rates of the condition. He said he would have some of the answers by September. So studies have been going for decades. He thinks he's going to do it in half a year, right? Not even half a year, a couple months. And then invite the research community to participate. We're going to test them with certain outcomes, he said. What does that mean? Is that begging the question? Mr. Kennedy said the studies would focus particularly on toxins that were introduced into the environment around 1989, identifying that as the year the autism epidemic began, a claim disputed by experts. The first study on autism was published in 1943, and the condition was added to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the primary classification system used by psychiatrists in 1980. Dr. David Mendel, a psychiatry professor at the University of Pennsylvania, said that researchers would be better off looking into the genetic components of autism and funding efforts to develop new services to support people with the condition. We are being set up to look in the wrong place, to put our money in the wrong place, Dr. Mendel said. So the reason why I want to talk about this really is because I don't know if I said this before, but it was pretty clear to me that after they come for the LGBT folk, maybe the next is the neurodivergent folk, right? So it's not exactly surprising to me that the trajectory the Republican Party have been going down has led to this point where, we now have essentially a targeting of autistic people. And so I'm autistic and I'm interested in this topic, so I thought it was really important to talk about this stuff, right? If autism is not taken seriously, then again, what's preventing these people from spreading lies about us, about, and then they became trans and then they became autistic and then, next thing you know, you lose your benefits, right? You lose your rights because this too will be considered a woke mind virus or something. But that's why I wanted to offer the perspective of Dazai, because Dazai wrote this work about 80 years ago. A little bit less. Was it a little bit less? Yeah, a little bit more than 80 years ago, I think. No, it was a little bit less than 80 years ago. I can't really do math anyway. And so this was well before autism was a known thing. And so this cannot be the woke mind virus. And yet it contains some of the most brilliant depiction of autism, some of the most brilliant depictions of autism that you'll ever see. That's why it's so popular nowadays. Many people have found themselves in the novel, including me. And I think that's because Dazai was autistic, and this book is basically an autism Bible. So RFK Jr. claims it's environmental, essentially. Forget the genetics. But it's really strange, because if it's environmental, then how is it possible that it existed such a long time ago where the environment was so different? And so this work will essentially argue the opposite argument, that it's quite deep. It goes deep, autism. Like, you can't just catch it. Because even if the environment can change and your autism can change, which is something I agree with, there could be something deeper there that cannot change. So I think this is an open question. I think the environment can do much to change it, but there might be some cases where it cannot do anything. And autism might just be a framework that is just hard to get rid of, the same way it's hard to get rid of thinking in numbers, right? People can't get rid of thinking in numbers, so maybe autistic people can stop thinking autistically, right? So let me just read a couple of quotes and talk about this, because I think this is probably the best counter-argument to this that there is. So this is all from No Longer Human, the English translation by Donald Keene, in case you want to know the source. This is how the novel begins, or this is not how it literally begins, but it's one of the first. There's like a prologue, right? I think, and this is kind of the beginning of the first chapter after the prologue, or whatever it's called when you begin a novel. And so, yeah, I'm gonna read that. Mine has been a life of much shame. I can't even guess myself what it must be to live the life of a human being. Right, so you can already see it. I was born in a village in the Northeast, and it wasn't until I was quite big that I saw my first train. I climbed up and down the station bridge, quite unaware that its function was to permit people to cross from one track to another. I was convinced that the bridge had been provided to lend an exotic touch and to make the station premises a place of pleasant diversity, like some foreign playground. I remained under this delusion for quite a long time, and it was actually it might be epilogue. I don't know the difference. Anyway, I remained under this delusion for quite a long time, and it was for me a very refined amusement indeed to climb up and down the bridge. I thought it was one of the most elegant services provided by the railways. When later I discovered that the bridge was nothing more than a utilitarian device, I lost all interest in it. So I think this is something autistic people can probably relate to. That probably has to do with the fact that an autistic person might see the world in a much more colorful way, right? They see things that other people don't see. For the autistic person, the drab kind of everyday life of, the everyday might be kind of depressing. So I can see myself in this, that you don't really want to live just for the sake of utility. You want to live for something else. And so this might be one aspect of autism there. It gets a lot darker. Again, I have never known what it means to be hungry. I don't mean by this statement that I was raised in a well-to-do family. I have no such banal intent. I mean that I have had not the remotest idea of the nature of the sensation of hunger. It sounds, God damn it, sounds peculiar to say it, but I have never been aware that my stomach was empty. When as a boy I returned home from school, the people at home would make a great fuss over me. You must be hungry. Remember what it's like, how terribly hungry you feel by the time you get home from school. How about some jelly beans? There's cake and biscuits too. Seeking to please, as I invariably did, I would mumble that I was hungry and stuff a dozen jelly beans in my mouth. But what they meant by feeling hungry completely escaped me. So this reminds me of indecision. Because you fear the world around you, which is a non-autistic world, you maybe train yourself to not care, to want nothing, to expect nothing. So you can already see how Yozo, who's the main character, felt alienated in the world because that world was not built for him. So this is not environmental. This is something that it's probably something that's innate, and then the environment comes in at how do you respond to this? How inclusive do you get? And the problem with the Republicans and people like that is that they do not have an inclusive mindset at all. So it's one thing to scrutinize the increase in autism, which is possible. It's another thing to respond to it. The problem is with the Republicans and the right-wingers is that they have no conception of empathy. They don't want to respond to it in a way that could help. So it could be that they actually are making autism worse. And that's an argument I made before. I think one reason why autistic people avoid eye contact is because they've been treated badly, for example. They're not going to be treated better because you put them on a registry. They're not going to be treated better because you make up conspiracies about how it's the vaccine who's causing it. Right? You need inclusive education, essentially, and these people don't want inclusive education because they think it's DEI. So I watched this debate with Sam Cedar, and he said the DEI actually included A, DEIA, and the A stands for accessibility. The Republicans don't want accessibility either. So there's just kind of some theory peppered in there. I have more, several pages of this stuff. I dreaded mealtime once more each day. I would sit there at the end of the table in the dimly lit room, and, trembling all over as with the cold, I would lift a few morsels of food to my mouth and push them in. Why must human beings eat 3 meals every single day? What extraordinary solemn faces they all make as they eat. It seems to be some kind of ritual. 3 times every day at the regulated hour. Again, the routine. It's kind of socially imposed routine. 3 times every day at the regulated hour, the family gathers in this gloomy room. The places are all laid out in the proper order, and regardless of whether we're hungry or not, we munch our food in silence, with lowered eyes. Who knows? It may be an act of prayer to propitiate whatever spirits may be lurking around the house. At times I went so far as to think in such terms. Eat or die, the saying goes, but to my ears it sounded like just one more unpleasant threat. Nevertheless, this superstition, I could only think of it as such, always aroused doubt and fear in me. Nothing was so hard for me to understand, so baffling, and at the same time so filled with menacing overtones as the commonplace remark, human beings work to earn their bread, for if they don't eat, they die. In other words, you might say that I still have no understanding of what makes human beings tick. That's very typical. My apprehension on discovering that my concept of happiness seemed to be completely at variance with that of everyone else was so great as to make me toss sleeplessly and groan night after night in my bed. It drove me indeed to the brink of lunacy. I wonder if I have actually been happy. People have told me, really more times than I can remember, ever since I was a small boy, how lucky I was. He was rich, but I have always felt as if I were suffering in hell. Right? The environment doesn't matter much to him. It has seemed to me, in fact, that those who called me lucky were incomparably more fortunate than I. I have sometimes thought that I have been burdened with a pack of 10 misfortunes, any one of which, if borne by my neighbor, would be enough to make a murderer of him. Now don't quote me on this, but I've heard that autistic people have like an 80% unemployment rate, right? And it's easy to see why. I mean, do you hear RFK Jr. complain about that? How we can... That's completely missing from his rhetoric, doesn't it? How can we incorporate autistic people into society better? Was there any talk about that? Is that not part of health? Does anybody else in the Trump cabinet is dealing with that question? I don't think so. So to them, it's all about imposing pain and suffering. They just don't give a shit. That's why it's not an exaggeration when people say, like, Republicans don't care, they don't want to solve problems. And this is where you see it. And it hits you like a ton of bricks, right? That They truly don't care. The right wing truly doesn't care. Because, and if you want evidence for this, it's right here that it's missing. Any kind of positive program is completely missing from that program. It's all about research, vaccines, whatever, but there is no program to actually help these people, right? It's completely missing from the rhetoric. It's not there. Where is it? I haven't seen it. I haven't heard it. And so what Dazai is talking about here is just that autistic people are not really welcome in society. Autistic people have I think they have a lifespan of like 60 years old or something. That's what I read on Wikipedia. But it could just be that autism is poorly understood. Maybe the real number is higher, right? But it's like, this is why it's so hard for autistic people to live. Because they don't understand. They can't just swallow what everybody else swallows. So that's why Dazai is saying this stuff, right? Everybody else is more fortunate than I am. Human beings work to earn their bread. It's a threat for the artist. The artist is looking for something more. So my perspective, I can totally agree with this, that as an artist, I'm looking for something more. I'm looking for something that's better than just do it because we told you that you have to do it. So it goes on. The more I think of it, the less I understand, right? All I feel are the assaults of apprehension and terror at the thought that I am the only one who is entirely unlike the rest. It is almost impossible for me to converse with other people. What should I talk about? How should I say it? I don't know. Very typical. So for me, this has been always been the case. Whereas other people find talking and small talk very easy, for me it seems just about impossible. I feel like I'm on a different planet. This was how I happened to invent my clowning. This is very important in the story. So just to paint a little picture, like, so Yozo is this rich kid, northeast of Japan. He doesn't say anything about his mother. His father is this kind of authority figure he's scared of. He gets molested by the servants at the house. They have this huge house. He invents this clowning to propitiate people, right? To hide his real identity. This is what autistic people call masking. You mask when you hide your real autistic identity and pretend to be normal. So this is huge evidence that this is autism. That, you know, he's describing autism decades before anybody ever knew it existed. So this is how I happened to invent my clowning. It was the last quest for love. I was to direct at, I need the next page. Human beings. Although I had a mortal dread of human beings, I seemed quite unable to renounce their society, hence masking. I managed to maintain on the surface a smile which never deserted my lips. This was the accommodation I offered to others. A most precarious achievement performed by me only at the cost of excruciating efforts within. Excruciating efforts within. As a child, I had absolutely no notion of what others, even members of my own family, might be suffering or what they were thinking. I was aware only of my own unspeakable fears and embarrassments. Before anyone realized it, I had become an accomplished clown. a child who never spoke a single truthful word. I have noticed that in photographs of me taken about that time together with my family, the others all have serious faces. Only mine is invariably contorted into a peculiar smile. This was one more variety of my childish, pathetic antics. Again, I never once answered back anything said to me by my family. The least word of reproof struck me with the force of a thunderbolt and drove me almost out of my head. Answer back. Far from it, I felt convinced that the reprimands were without doubt voices of human truth, speaking to me from eternity's past. I was obsessed with the idea that, since I lacked the strength to act in accordance with this truth, I might already have been disqualified from living among human beings. So that's the original title of the book, is Disqualified from Being Human. Shingeki no Kyojin, right? I think. No. That's AOT. It's, hold on, I'm stupid. What? Ningen Shikaku, yeah. Ningen Shikaku. Kyojin is like giants. Sorry. I'm being racist here. Okay, so this belief made me incapable of arguments or self-justification. Again, I think that's pretty typical. You just freeze. Alright? Whenever anyone criticized me, I felt certain that I had been living under the most dreadful misapprehension. I always accepted the attack in silence, though inwardly so terrified as almost to be out of my mind. It is true, I suppose, that nobody finds it exactly pleasant to be criticized or shouted at, but I see in the face of the human being raging at me a wild animal in its true colors, one more horrible than any lion, crocodile, or dragon. So, yeah, and these are the problems that need to be addressed in society, because in a way it's begging the question: if we don't give autistic people an environment where they can thrive, of course the worst parts of autism will come out, and then you can say, aha, that's what they are. So it's very important that we give them what they do. Let's read some more. And if you want to read the whole book, just read it. But if you're not gonna do it, just listen to this. I mean, I've read it like 15 times already. It's very interesting. You can analyze it forever. I have always shook with fright before human beings. Unable as I was to feel the least particle of confidence in my ability to speak and act like a human being, I kept my solitary agonies locked in my breast. I kept my melancholy and my agitation hidden, careful lest any trace should be left. Hold on. Any trace should be left exposed. I feigned an innocent optimism. I gradually perfected myself in the role of the farcical eccentric. Yep. I thought, as long as I can make them laugh, it doesn't matter how, I'll be alright. If I succeed in that, the human beings probably won't mind it too much if I remain outside their lives. The one thing I must avoid is becoming offensive in their eyes. I shall be nothing, the wind, the sky. My activities as jester, a role born of desperation, were extended even to the servants, whom I feared even more than my family, because I found them incomprehensible. Whenever I was asked what I wanted, my first impulse was to answer nothing. The thought went through my mind that it didn't make any difference, that nothing was going to make me happy. My definition of a respected man was one who had succeeded almost completely in hoodwinking people, but who was finally seen through by some omniscient, omnipotent person who ruined him and made him suffer a shame worse than death. So this was pretty much his childhood. And one thing that happens in the story is that, you know, he would always play the clown in the school, right? Again, very familiar to me. I was never a class clown. I was never popular with the class, but I always had a couple of friends and I would always play the clown. I made people laugh all the time. People would tell me explicitly, like, you're just so funny, like, and not like ironically, like, you know, I would make people laugh so hard they would collapse on the floor, you know. So so it, you know, it's another aspect where I saw myself. But, you know, one thing that happened is in the story when he was a child is that he was exposed by a student. They were in gym class, right? And the task was, you know, like lunge over this like bar, and he unused the bar on purpose and fell. And then one kid said, "You did that on purpose," you know. So that really fucked him up because his masking was exposed. So after that, we go to his adult life, and his adult life is just filled with debauchery, you know. He's very handsome, right? So he gets a lot of women, but he doesn't like women at all. He's a pretty big misogynist, and he doesn't like that. He doesn't like the attention he receives. And then there's you know, suicide attempts, and I'm not gonna get into all that now, but I just wanted to pick out some of the quotes. And I noticed I left out some of the quotes where he's talking about how anxious he was, right? He could barely, like, when he went to the city, he couldn't even board the streetcar because he was afraid of the conductor and, you know, all that stuff. I sort of left that out, but that's in there. Severe anxiety, again, very typical of autism. When I was diagnosed, they told me that's part of the autism. Didn't just come out of nowhere. So now the quotes are about his older life, when he's living this debauched kind of life. So, irrationality. I found the thought faintly pleasurable, or rather, I felt at ease with it. What frightened me was the logic of the world. In it lay the foretaste of something incalculably powerful. Its mechanism was incomprehensible, and I could not possibly remain closeted in that windowless, bone-chilling room. He was renting a windowless, bone-chilling room when he already dropped out of college at this point. His father kind of cut his like funds, so he was kind of just living a debauched life of alcoholism, pretending to be a communist, you know, that sort of some pretty crazy shit. Though outside lay the sea of, and he was Dazai was a leftist in real life. Reluctantly, he was guilty of being rich. Though outside lay the sea of irrationality, it was far more agreeable to swim in its waters until presently I drowned. People talk of social outcasts. The words apparently denote the miserable losers of the world, the vicious ones. But I feel as though I have been a social outcast from the moment I was born. If ever I meet someone society has designated as an outcast, I invariably feel affection for him, an emotion which carries me away in melting tenderness. So, this is important. This is important because it counteracts the bigoted kind of language RFK Jr. uses. When he talks about autistic people, he appeals to the minority of autistic people who have severe autism and who can't use a toilet on their own. And that might be true for some autistic people, but the vast majority of them are not like that. So he kind of portrays them as like monsters. And that's a problem. Because Dazai had a lot of empathy. Many of us autistic people, I think, have a lot of empathy. Because we know what it's like to be outcast and we don't like it. Yeah. So here, there's one of my favorite parts. One of my favorite parts of the story is this kind of skepticism of science and statistics. This is important here because to be reduced to numbers is not a good idea, right? So to have a registry where autistic people are listed, right? And you're throwing around statistics like 25% are like this, another 25% are like that, This is repulsive to some autistic people anyway, because they don't find it acceptable to be reduced to numbers. And I think partially part of the autistic mind is to have this kind of logical brain where you're reduced to quantity. And so Dazai speaks about this here, where he used to think in like numbers, and he realized this kind of bullshit to reduce everything to quantity. So he says, I had been so terrorized by scientific statistics. If 10 million people each leave over 3 grains of rice from their lunch, how many sacks of rice are wasted in one day? If 10 million people each economize 1 paper handkerchief a day, how much pulp will be saved? That whenever I left over a single grain of rice, whenever I blew my nose, I imagined that I was wasting mountains of rice, tons of paper, and I fell prey to a mood dark, as if I had committed some terrible crime. But these were the lies of science, the lies of statistics and mathematics. You can't collect 3 grains of rice from everybody. So this is a kind of anti-scientific realist standpoint. So he philosophically is pretty much a nihilistic relativist. Even as an exercise in multiplication or division, it ranks as one of the most elementary and feeble-minded problems, about on a par with the computation of the percentage of times that people sleep in dark unlighted bathrooms and fall into the toilet, or the percentage of passengers who get their feet caught in the space between the door of a subway train and the edge of the platform, or other such footling exercises in probability. These events seem entirely within the bounds of possibility, but I have never heard a single instance of anyone hurting himself by falling into the toilet. I felt pity and contempt for the self, which until yesterday had accepted such hypothetical situations as eminently factual, scientific truths, and was terrified by them. This shows the degree to which I had bit by bit arrived at the knowledge of the real nature of what is called the world. So again, the reason why I find this interesting vis-a-vis autism is because I think many autistic people have a tendency to be anti-authority. They don't like any kind of authority because authority screwed them over. I think many of them are individualistic. And so it makes sense for them to be anarchistic, maybe anti-science, right? To be against scientific reductionism. And the funny thing is, like communism was illegal when Dazai was around, like, so that was illegal because it was under the U.S. occupation after Imperial Japan fell, and so communism was illegal. And obviously it was illegal. It was illegal under imperialism too. But give me a sec. I think what is so interesting here is that usually it's the right wing which is against kind of social determinism, right? And right now it's the right which is pushing social determinism the hardest. It's very strange. It didn't used to be like that. So it used to be that postmodernists came around and they said, look, it's all basically the environment's fault. Science is just society. It's all about power. It's all about societal power. And this frames our identities. Now there's been a shift. Seems like it's the left who's taking the genetic determinist position, and it's the right. It's the right which is pushing the social determinist position. Because that's exactly what RFK Jr. is saying, for example. He's saying that forget the genes, forget the research into genetics. It's all about the environment. You have to look at the garbage in the environment, and maybe that will explain it. That's a really interesting shift. And it's, I think, the same way with LGBT, right? That usually the right wingers are the ones who say, oh, it's all biologically determined. You can't just be anything you want to be, all that kind of crap. And yet they are the ones who are pushing this kind of narrative where LGBT is just the result of social propaganda. So they're contradicting themselves. They're saying that gender is biological. At the same time, they're all worried about how gender identity is being skewered by society, right? So that's a contradiction. They can't really resolve it. Because the fact that people are changing their genders suggests that there is something social about gender, right? And it's the left which accepts, yeah, some people are just born trans. It's the right wing that used to say everything is genetic, and now it's the left which says everything is genetic, and the right is the one that says, oh, it's all socially conditioned anyway. Autism, socially conditioned. It's the environment. Trans people, it's brainwashing, and they are science deniers, right? They deny empirical research, like the evidence for COVID, right? Evidence for climate change. And it's like the left was supposed to be the ones to do this. The left used to be the science deniers, so to speak, and now it's of course they did it in a much more sophisticated way. But there's an obvious shift. So that's interesting here. I felt afraid no matter where I was. Another nice quote. I didn't meet my benefactor of that night again for a whole month. Talking about somebody that he had slept with. After leaving her, my happiness grew fainter every day that went by. It frightened me even that I had accepted a moment's kindness. I felt I had imposed horrible bonds on myself. Gradually, even the mundane fact that Tsuneko had paid the bill at the cafe began to weigh on me, and I felt as though she was just another threatening woman, like the girl at my lodging house, or the girl from the teacher's training college. Even at the distance which separated us, Tsuneko intimidated me constantly. So this is more of the same kind of, you're afraid of people. And one reason why you're afraid of them is because they impose these bonds on you, right? And again, this is something I can attest to, that I'm terribly afraid of seeing somebody twice, or like meeting somebody twice, because the first time it went well, I don't want to ruin it the second time. I'm afraid of their kindness because I feel that imposes debts on me. So again, this is very hard to explain why exactly it happens that way when you're autistic. Not always, but many times, I guess. But that's another thing you can attest to, and again, very hard to find the environmental reason. It's just probably something genetic, and it's hard to fix when you're this screwed up, you know. Okay, so I moved places because I was getting lightheaded because of the sun. Yeah, my feet could use some brushing, I guess. A little bit yellow. Anyway, so I moved places because I was getting lightheaded from the sun. Now I'm in the middle of a bushy bunch of crap. We still have 2 pages to finish, so I gotta get the job done, you know. So we're talking about the hypocrisy of Republicans. We're talking about Yozo and how impossible it is to put your trust in somebody, right? I mean, the only time Yozo found trust was when he was with prostitutes. With prostitutes, he was able to feel completely at ease because he saw in them people that were also outcast by society, essentially. And then he had like one love relationship with a woman that I think he tried to commit suicide with together. And so because she was miserable too, he found peace with her too. But none of these things ever last, right? So he says, besides, I was intolerably afraid that if I met again a woman I had once slept with, I might suddenly burst into a flaming rage. It was my nature to be very timid about meeting people anyway. And so I finally chose the expedient of keeping a safe distance from the Ginza. It's a place in Tokyo, I think. This timidity of nature was no trickery on my part. Women do not bring to bear so much as a particle of connection between what they do after going to bed and what they do on rising in the morning. They go on living with their world successfully divided in two, as if total oblivion had intervened. My trouble was that I could not yet successfully cope with this extraordinary phenomenon. So I guess this is very subjective, right? I don't know if this is true in general or not, but I had the same experience. One day they like you, the other day they don't. I think this happened to me like 3 times. I don't really get it either. Maybe it's because we're autists, I don't know. I don't know if this is an autism thing or some not picking up on the cues, I have no idea, but this is very strange. I mean, I'm not gonna pretend I'm not some kind of an incel, you know. Because why would you assume otherwise? If it's difficult for the autistic guy to deal with anyone, why would have the human race be exempt from this difficulty? So I think that just because you don't like women as an autistic guy doesn't mean you don't like them as such. You just don't like them in the same way you don't like men, but you happen to be attracted to them, so it's a little bit difficult, right? But I think there's an obvious disconnect between an autistic guy and women, because they play all this, they're complicated, they give you cues, they play games. I can't be bothered. Guys are much more simple. I don't think this is false. So I don't know what else to say about that. I have never been able to meet anyone without an accompaniment of painful smiles. The buffoonery of defeat. Buffoonery of defeat. What I had acquired was the technique of stammering somehow, almost in a daze, the necessary small talk. So I managed to figure out how to do small talk with people. Something I can replicate if I want to, but it's never authentic. I never wanted to do it. Whenever I tried, like I would show up in a bar, and it would end catastrophically. But I already told those stories. Yeah, it's just masking, So I guess what I want to really say with this whole video is that just compare the complexity between what the fucking moron is saying and what an actually intelligent autistic person describes as their experience. Very different, right? The weak fear happiness itself. They can harm themselves on cotton wool. Sometimes they are wounded even by happiness. Yep, same thing here. Something good happens, you just feel like something bad's gonna happen immediately. Again, some of this stuff might be more universal, but as an autistic, I can definitely attest to that too. So there's a very interesting part, which is gonna be the last thing here. Penultimate thing, actually. So Yozo is bickering with Horiki, who's kind of his friend. They're not really friends. And I had the same experience too, where you have a friend, but it's not real. Like, you always feel uncomfortable. And maybe for a normal guy that's okay, but for us, like, I could never stop feeling uncomfortable even when I was around my so-called friends. So it's that kind of relationship. Can you call that an autistic relationship? I don't know, but it's similar. So Horiki is chiding him for being a tramp, being a womanizer, and so on and so forth. Probably because he's jealous. But here, Yozo develops a very interesting philosophy in which society becomes the individual. So here we see a kind of anarchistic, Stirnerian, maybe Nietzschean view of society, where society is not this uniform substance. It's something that is diffused. It lives in each individual, and it's oppressive. This is one of the cornerstones of my philosophy too. I think this is true. The philosophical position that society as a whole doesn't exist is called methodological individualism. But this is a kind of twist on it. So listen to this. It says, Horiki says, You must stop your. And by if you want to read the book, it's really dark. So there's all kinds of trigger warnings, drug addiction, suicide, rape. You must stop your fooling around with women. You've gone far enough. Society won't stand for more. What, I wonder, did he mean by society? The plural of human beings? Where was the substance of this thing called society? I had spent my whole life thinking that society must certainly be something powerful, harsh and severe. But to hear Horiki talk made the words, "Don't you mean yourself?" come to the tip of my tongue. But I held the words back, reluctant to anger him. Society won't stand for it. It's not society. You're the one who won't stand for it. Right? If you do such a thing, society will make you suffer for it. It's not society. It's you, isn't it? Before you know it, you'll be ostracized by society. It's not society. You're going to do the ostracizing, aren't you? Words of every kind went flitting through my head. Know thy particular fearsomeness, thy knavery, cunning and witchcraft. What I said, however, as I wiped the perspiration from my face with a handkerchief, was merely, "You've put me in a cold sweat." I smiled. From then on, however, I came to hold, almost as a philosophical conviction, the belief: what is society but an individual? From the moment I suspected that society might be an individual, I was able to act more in accordance with my own inclinations. So he became more kind of tough and freed when he realized society basically doesn't exist. Or, I don't mean like, this is a very particular theory, that society is the individual. It's when you meet an individual, you meet society. So for him, it's a then and then struggle. Like, society is always just one moment to the next. It's always decided by moments, decisions. He then kind of backtracks on that. He's kind of all over the place. But I think the general theory is correct. It is basically just reducible to individual human greed, fear, jealousy. You could argue there's something above and beyond that. But nobody knows what that is. It's kind of an indescribable X, a lack. I mean, what is the environment, right? I made this argument. What is the environment? You can find it anywhere, but it's also everywhere. Right? What it amounts to is that people who get put into this asylum are crazy, and those who don't are normal. So after a suicide attempt, he's put into an insane asylum, deemed crazy. But I really like this quote. That's the fundament of truth, is that what is a disease? Well, it's something that we call a disease. What is a mental illness? It's something that we call a mental illness. Autism doesn't have to be a mental illness. It's probably or a disability or developmental disorder. We call it that mostly because we don't accept these people as part of society. So like I said, there's a kind of a begging of the question going on here. Kind of circularity going on here with RFK Jr. And then here's a bunch of other like really nice quotes there. Everything passes, this kind of Heraclitean nihilism. Everything passes. Now I have neither happiness nor unhappiness. Everything passes. This is the one and only thing I have thought resembled the truth in the society of human beings, where I have dwelled, up to now, as in a burning hell. Everything passes. This year I am 27. My hair has become much grayer. Most people would take me for over 40. That's the last thing I printed out. Really depressing. It gets more depressing if you read the story. But yeah, I guess thoughts and reflections. I already made a video on No Longer Human once. I don't want to repeat everything, but like, I think this serves as a brilliant counter-argument to the reductionist use of RFK Jr. It is so even though it masquerades as complex, right? Because it's the environment. But to appeal to the environment can itself be a kind of reductionism. Because it denies that genes have something to do with it. Give me a sec. So some final reflections, I guess. I just find it spectacular how reductive the views of these people are. Right? They focus on marriage, you know. They focus on conservative values. But they just don't give a flying fuck about anyone who's a little bit different. It's not in their theory. They don't say anything about it. They don't care that Trump has cut USAID nearly $2 trillion of USAID, which could kill millions of starving children. They just don't give a fuck. And they pretend they care about abortion, but probably they don't care. I don't know why they say it, but probably they don't care. Because if they care about people and their welfare, then why? Why don't they care about autistic people? Why don't they care about gay people? Why don't they care about anyone except... You know, it seems like they're much more tethered to ideas than people. Right? That's something I've noticed about them, is that they don't really care about people as such. They're more interested in some vague abstraction about that describes the right kind of society, where everybody knows their place, and you know, women know their place, and something like autism and neurodivergence doesn't even come into the picture. It's way beyond them. You know, LGBT people, they only come into the purview just to shit on them, right? But something as complex as autism is not even on their radar. It's only on their radar now because of RFK Jr. And it's purely negative. But you know, I've been working on a script to just talk about U.S. politics and world politics, just to kind of sum up the situation, give my thoughts. And so I'm probably going to do it the same way. I'm just probably going to read it so that my thoughts will be more organized. And I won't just be talking all over the fucking place. So that's coming up. Maybe you'll be interested in that. I'll make a couple of arguments that are probably unique to the situation. Like I'll be talking about stuff like that it's impossible to... The way we respond to COVID, for example, is part of what COVID is, right? You know, so I have a couple of kind of unique viewpoints that might be worth sharing. So that's why I'm kind of doing this stuff. Yeah. And I could talk about more stuff, but it's probably enough for now. I probably made all the points I wanted to make about autism. I just wish there was somebody, like if there's one thing that I wish existed, was somebody took all the stuff that I said and made them more accessible to people. Yeah, maybe that will happen one day. But this is how I do it. Yeah, we have a sociopathic. I mean, Trump obviously doesn't give a fuck, right? He doesn't care one way or the other. He's pro-LGBT one day, anti-LGBT the next day. He doesn't care, right? It's not like you could murder all the autistics. He wouldn't care for a second, right? So, oh yeah. And, the other thing that right-wingers care about a lot is aesthetics. Like, it's kind of funny that it was the left who got pinned as like, oh, you just don't care about the facts, you care about emotions, you care about empathy. And it's, the right wing that tethers everything to aesthetics. Like, to them, everything is an aesthetic decision, They don't really care about the facts. They don't really care about the research. It's just all facts. It's just all feelings to them, Same-sex marriage, bad. Why? Because it ruins our image, Autistics, forget about it. We don't have such a thing. They don't like anyone who's deviant, right? So, if you ask me, like, why, I'm not a right-winger, is because they're just stupid. Like, their philosophy is so depressing. I mean, they are the ones who always talk about, if you don't believe in God, then how do you ground your morals? Well, all you have to do is take one good look at what their morals are and see can possibly come from there. Wherever it is they're getting their morals from, we should get it from the opposite direction, because they don't have any. They don't care about people suffering in Gaza. They don't care about cutting US aid. They don't care about autistic people. They don't care about anything. They're nihilists. It always ends up being these so-called atheistic, nihilistic degenerates who care about people, right? 9 times out of 10. So I just don't buy the story. I don't buy the right-wing, pro-religious, anti-degeneracy, all that kind of garbage. It's a total flipped image of what reality actually is. I find their philosophy a million times more depressing than my own, or whatever the left has to offer. But I think if you're anything, if you're poor, if you're working class, if you're autistic, if you're a woman, if you're gay, if you're trans, if you're a starving child in Somalia, South America, if you're an immigrant, run. Don't fall for their tricks. Like, one thing they try to do is pit women against trans women, right? Like, natural default women against trans women, and say, they're beating you in sports. And look, even if that's an issue, let's say that it is to an extent, don't fall for their tricks, because they're coming for you next. They'll have you as slaves, right? Like, Jordan Peterson was always presented himself as this voice of reason, cold facts and logic, against postmodernist mush, and he's the most postmodernist asshole on the planet. And he doesn't have any values. He doesn't care if 60,000 Palestinians get slaughtered by Israel. He doesn't give a fuck. He supports Israel, He blabbers and shits out words with no meaning. The hypocrites. Don't buy them. Don't buy it. Don't buy the story. It's bullshit. The right has nothing to offer. Their economics is total bullshit. It's the state that provided all the research that we have today, that provided the technology of today. The research was done in government universities, government labs. Elon Musk's companies have received $38 billion of subsidies. Don't be against welfare. Don't be against redistribution of wealth. It's what the modern economy, the modern society is based upon. Without the state, there would be nothing. Yes, I want to get into these economic topics a little bit, maybe. But that's the other irony. Is I'm giving you a kind of appetizer for what's coming. In my next video, I guess, is the right wing claims to be against postmodernism, especially the religious ones, right? But the Bible is like the most postmodernist text ever. There's multiple different authors. The stories are always up to interpretation. Made up of different books by different authors, right? When you call out a Christian for, hey, why does the Bible support slavery? And they say, well, God had to be practical, in that time and that place, slavery was everywhere, so God had to be practical. It's like, who's the postmodernist here? Who is the relativist here, right? They would justify anything, not based on reason and evidence, but feelings, aesthetic judgments. It's really the left that's doing a better job of apprehending reality. It's like, if you're so afraid of, that's what I touched upon before, if you're so afraid of the trans mind virus, why not just duke it out? Why not just fund LGBT, trans research, and let's see what the truth is. Is it real? Is it bullshit? Well, let's fund it. Let's fund the research, right? But they don't want to do that. To them, to even fund LGBT research and LGBT care, which would be part of the research, right? Because we need more data. That's already like anathema. That's already molesting kids or whatever. So they don't want to have the honest debate. Let's investigate trans identity. Is it real? Is it just a fad? They don't want you to find out, which shows you how shaky their beliefs are and confident about it. Like I said, I think the very fact that so many people are transitioning, the fact that they want to stop that, the fact that they want to oppress people, suppress their identities, I don't think that's suppressing a fad. I think it's the opposite. I think they're the ones who don't want the truth to be revealed. If trans identity isn't real, if it's just some passing fad, why do you need to suppress it? Wouldn't it just go away? I mean, the fact that so many people are reporting being trans is evidence that it's real. And if you try to suppress this identity, it's evidence that you're the one full of shit. The very fact that you try to suppress it is evidence that you're not confident in your beliefs. If you're really confident, we would let everyone, hey, just choose. What are you? Well, not choose. It's the opposite. You fall into what you are. So let's give you the option. Fall into what you are. Don't brainwash people. Fall into what you are. Find your real identity. But they won't let you do that. They call you diseased and sick. Like RFK Jr. is calling autistic people. It's a disease. It's not a disease per se. It's only a disease if you treat people badly as a result. And maybe for some people you can consider it a disease because it's so bad. But that's not all. That's not all autistic people. I think it probably is extremely dependent on the environment. And in some cases, the environment won't do much. In more severe cases, it won't do much. But these are the questions that need to be asked. And somebody like RFK Jr. doesn't want to ask those questions. I mean, the fact that he's so anti-autism doesn't suggest that whatever results the researchers will find he will accept. Or maybe the research will be skewed. So, because remember in what I read, it said, we're going to task the researchers to reach certain results. But that's not what he said. We're going to task the researchers to something like to find certain outcomes. Yeah, outcomes. Isn't it begging the question? Is that the point of the research, is to not beg the question? I don't know if I would trust his research, given his anti-vax, anti-autism conspiracy brain. Might be a better idea to let the research be done by independent organizations. Yeah, I'm afraid he'll probably just skew the results at this point. But then, actual scientists will, if the research is published, actual scientists can respond to it, right? So we'll see. But, like I said at the beginning, I don't think I ever said this, but I've been suspecting it for years, that if they came for the LGBT folk, who's to say we're not next? Yeah, that's the way it is. We're next. So, and the other thing was like natalism. Like I already said this like a year ago, that the next thing right-wingers are going to do is they're going to push natalism, and they're pushing it pretty hard now. It's becoming a pretty... So everything I said in the past few years has come true. That's the problem with being smart. Is even if you say, oh, but you're ugly and you have an accent and whatever, I'm right about almost everything I say. And that's the intelligence loop. You can't help being right all the fucking time. It's pretty painful a thing to have to deal with. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're not coming for the autistic people, but that seems to be the fucking trend. Oh, it's the autism, the reason why they're trans is because they're autistic, So let's shoot them both. Or at least let's deprive them of their rights, fearmonger about them, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, it's already here, it's already happening, Huge degeneration of society. The mid-2010s, it was really progressive. You have to remember something, okay? Trump is probably the most important thing. In the run-up to the 2016 elections, Trump was pro-LGBT. He held up a pride flag. Okay, you can watch this on YouTube. Held up a pride flag that said, gays for Trump or whatever. LGBT for Trump. And he said, I'm going to protect the rights of LGBTQ plus Americans. Something like that. And then the crowd cheered. Republican crowd cheered. And then he applauded the crowd for cheering. He said, thank you for cheering. Imagine that now. Really quick. Society changes like this. Something else I already said. And it happened. Depressing. Some more of this to come. Yeah. So thank you to the few people that comment. Thank you to the one guy who said he likes my videos and comments sometimes. And yeah, I'll be back.